So I think WordPress is like a textbook case of disruptive innovation, right? You have this system that was thought of as, hosting blogs, and it's expanded in a dramatic manner. So I think I have a lot of admiration and respect for WordPress as an open source community, and they've managed to expand the footprint of the web in ways that were unimaginable because not everybody has access to strong teams. So we had closer to WordPress, we had challenges around scaling it. So one of the issues that you had with WordPress was scaling it. And hosting this and moving this to a cloud, if you know it very well, is trickier than you can imagine, right? The footprint of a platform such as WordPress and the challenges in managing CI/CD and having strong developer experience combined with the authoring experience, which is great, is a huge challenge.
Hey everybody, it's Roger with Kinsta. I'm joined by a new friend today, Felipe. Hey Felipe, how are you?
Hey Roger, thank you for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. Hey, so I want to jump into digital marketing and your thoughts on agentic AI and all of these awesome topics that are happening today. But before we do that, I really want to learn more about you and how you got into all of this. Did you go to school for anything specific, or were you just really curious as a kid? How did you get into digital marketing?
Yeah, thank you. I haven't told this story many times, but yeah, I was born in Bogotá, Colombia, and I was kind of fortunate enough to have older brothers in the 80s, and they got a computer. They got computers, so they had like an Atari K back in the 80s, and I remember the time that they got a Mac. Right, it was one of the early Macs, and I was hooked into it, and I had these kind of nerdy friends. And we managed to plug into what were at the time bulletin board systems, which was pre-internet. And I remember the sound. It's the same dial-up sound that you hear today, or that you used to hear before. But it's kind of this iconic dial-up sound. And I was kind of hooked. And we had like a BBS. And I remember I set up a BBS on an Atari, and we had 2 lines because my friend's mother was a psychologist, and she was working from home, so we had 2 lines, and we set up this BBS, and I was impressed, and we logged into BBSs in the early days, and I remember there were groups and whatnot, and then my brothers were studying in the US. I got into Usenet back in early 90s, and that was very impressive. So I finished high school. There was this strange moment in my life where you have to go to the army. You have to do public service for a year in Colombia. So I go to the army, and I was told never to speak about computers. I should keep it a secret, or else I would be, dragged into a basement, working on AS400 systems. So I managed to keep it for a while, but eventually they found out, and I ended up, managing Excel and doing networking things and whatnot. So I end up that public service, and I got into school for management, not for engineering. So I was in management, and I bought 2 books during that time. I bought in my freshman year, I bought a Photoshop book and an HTML 3.2, and I started, learning about computers, doing web development at that point, and I managed to sort of fund my career and a lot of interest that I had during that time. And then I graduated in September 18, 2001, and it was the worst time to graduate. There were no jobs. Crash. It was also the post 9/11, so there were no jobs to be had. And I thought, what, I'm gonna start a company. I'm gonna start doing what I know how to do until I do it right. Okay. I thought it was going to be a temporary thing, and it's taking me over 25 years. So I started Aplyca in 2005 and got deeply into content management.
Okay.
Because for some reason, content management, as you're developing PHP, it is usually it's the first project you do. And if you like it, it becomes a lifelong thing, right? You can't get away from that. Content management becomes more complex and more sophisticated. And that's sort of the short story of how I got into, content management and web development in general.
Absolutely. I love it. It parallels a lot of what I went through. I had a Tandy, was the first computer that we worked on. And then we started getting a 386 and then a 486. And then when I got to college, the internet appeared, and I was just, I was sold from day one. I love your comment about how, CMSs are like almost every developer's first project. And I do remember in the early 2000s and even late 90s, everybody was building their own blogging system. As you got into the CMS space, What were the first CMSs that really caught your attention and made you realize like, oh, there's something here?
Yeah. So, while I was studying afterwards, I did a postgraduate degree on management information systems, and I was hanging out with these Java people, right?
Okay.
So they had these Java platforms. I think it was Open CMS or something of that sort, and I wanted to find something that was working in PHP, and I got into Easy Systems and Easy Publish. It was an early day CMS that had a fantastic content model. So for me, like being super organized, it had content types and it had roles and permissions. It was quite enterprisey, and I started developing on that in the open source world. And I think those early days in the Nordics type of CMS systems that were coming out was very formative. And I got there, and I started developing this in Colombia. I go to Europe. And I meet all of these companies that were at a much different place that I was. Their practices were, their clients were huge, and they were working with government and the stock market or whatnot. So those were the early days, and I got into this. And the reason that there weren't that many Latin Americans or American companies doing relatively high-end web development meant that I got access to like large media companies. So there was these newspapers in Honduras or in Mexico, and they wanted to do this implementation. So I jumped from, I think my clients at that point were like 1,000 visitors a month or 10,000 visitors, probably the biggest one, a university or something. And then you end up doing a site for 1 million visitors. And then you're live, and you have to develop all those skills, right? In terms of, content structuring and also operational skills, because these sites would go down. I remember they were hosting on Rackspace. You had to call a salesperson, and they would take a week to quote you on better specs. And this is not the way that the world would work. I remember when Michael Jackson died, or these huge events that would bring down all of the those time sites down. So I was crash coursed into cloud computing for some reason, and ended up developing those skills inside the company for getting into cloud more for necessity than anything else.
Sure. Okay. All right. So fast forward a little bit to today. What CMS systems are you most excited about, and that you're working with your clients on the most?
Yeah. So I think old CMS people, made the transition around, scaling up, sites. If you're working with WordPress, scaling WordPress beyond one machine, is quite a challenge. I think the industry moved into a headless model, and we can talk a little bit about that, because it's interesting how that changes the paradigm for development. So I made the shift. Okay. I was a headless denier for a while, and then I got into headless, and I got the company to transition, and it has quite strong advantages. So we got into Contentful, and we started doing headless stuff ourselves, or building custom solutions using headless. And I thought that was very interesting. I think those platforms are also moving from being like pure headless, gravitating into DXP. So everybody gravitates into DXP for different reasons, right? For business reasons, or for technical reasons, or organizational reasons, you end up gravitating towards the DXP space. And we also had somehow avoided the Adobe CQ5 kind of ecosystem for a while, and we committed to that in order to have like a broader series of resources for nearshore development. So we're excited about Adobe AEM and sort of where that's going, and they are also renovating their stack into the headless, into the document-based publishing, which was kind of an old idea that now is being refreshed. Publishing from Google Docs or Word, that kind of things are interesting, and also having performance first.
Okay.
So that I think that's exciting, having these universal values come back, because everybody talks about digital experience and exciting digital experience. I think performance is an undeniable, factor for good digital experience. So I think that having highly performant sites, whatever CMS you're using, is definitely something that's really good. Having, stronger content structures, having better tagging, better retrieval options for users, and making the most out of your traffic is definitely something. And then we'll get into AI at some point in our conversations on, how this is changing. But you're probably seeing a similar trend in your end.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I'm curious to kind of ask you about your thoughts on WordPress. Obviously, Kinsta is a WordPress host. We're very invested in the space. I personally have been playing with WordPress for over 20 years at this point. When you're working with your enterprise clients, do you see WordPress mentioned much? And if not, or if yes, what makes you wary maybe of working with WordPress with an enterprise type situation?
Yeah. So I think WordPress is like a textbook case of disruptive innovation, right? You have this system that was thought of as, hosting blogs, and it's expanded in a dramatic manner. So I think I have a lot of admiration and respect for WordPress as an open source community, and they've managed to expand the footprint of the web in ways that were unimaginable because not everybody has access to, strong teams. So we had closer to WordPress, we had challenges around scaling it. So one of the issues that you had with WordPress was scaling it, and hosting this and moving this to a cloud, if you know it very well, is trickier than you can imagine, right? The footprint of a platform such as WordPress and the challenges in managing CI/CD and having strong developer experience combined with the authoring experience, which is great, is a huge challenge. So that was quite fun in our cases to run site factories and to actually solve the hosting part. And if you look at it today, it's grown in such a way that you can build anything on WordPress. Is it a good idea to build it in WordPress? Well, I don't know, but I also seen that large enterprises are more familiar with WordPress pros and cons and are taking the plunge, and nothing wrong is happening. So, nothing wrong is happening in most situations where this is done professionally. So it's not like this is going to be, now you need to do it on a high level, right? You have to have serious engineers, building the thing, to have serious teams such as yourself hosting it. So you need to treat it as a high level system. It's not something to take lightly. But I think today it follows sort of my approach to scaling some of these systems is that you leave the CMS to do what it does best. Like in the early days, you would do everything on the application footprint in WordPress, like in WordPress or in Drupal or in whatever that is, right? And at some point, you end up facing scalability issues, security vulnerabilities that have a big impact. So in general, sort of my approach has been to have lighter weight CMSs, even if I'm using the CXP, because as you start building e-commerce and transactional e-commerce, as you start building stuff, you see the trend has been to keep the CMS contained, treat the CMS database like it's like a princess, right? It doesn't have to do any work. And the reason we live today through all of these challenges is because we've managed to do content delivery networks and caching, and the search, we moved it to Elasticsearch or something else. So essentially you leave the CMS to have a core footprint for digital experience, and you build all of this stuff around it to make sure that this type of solutions work. And I think that pattern is applicable to any type of solution you do.
Okay, yeah, and that makes complete sense. And the enterprise agencies that are focused on WordPress I talk with say the exact same stuff you're saying. So it's nice to hear, an outsider, as it were, kind of reinforce what we're seeing. I mentioned Agentic AI at the start of it. I'd love to, in the few more minutes that we've got here, just to hear kind of your thoughts and your approach to these systems, especially with your enterprise clients. How are these discussions going?
Yeah, so I think, the discussions are coming in either from clients who have this pressure from the board and from higher up saying, okay, you have to do something with this thing, right? And also the discussions is driven by vendors, right? Adding capabilities. And they add capabilities that are going to be usable for a wide range of customers and also safe, right? They want to make sure that this is applicable everywhere. So I think there are two different areas. So one is automation and efficiency in the editorial experience. And that's one area, right? And you start adding this, summarization and internal efficiency-oriented features, right? Those are nice. It's cool. It's exciting. But everybody has, their own ChatGPT there, and they can use. You're not opening massive doors, essentially, in terms of efficiency. But it's cool. It's good. It's good that it's being done. Now, what is more interesting is consuming that content and exposing it to users, right? And this, you see that it's, first of all, it's much harder. You see these demos on Twitter, or people talking about them on LinkedIn and whatnot, and they are usually, a single developer doing fantastic things very quickly, and you're like, okay, this is incredible, I'm missing out. And we've approached this pretty much from a search practitioner standpoint, like extending. We know about content structure, we know about search experiences, and expanding this. And I think it makes a lot of sense. It's much harder than you expect at the beginning, but there is also a lot of value to be gained in having conversational systems, improving search in such a way that you can use multimodal and have a lot of these capabilities. So that's sort of where I think we're focusing, and we're seeing a lot of interest. Okay. I don't think that customers are really, it's not a major factor in terms of, editorial efficiency. So I'm thinking that these agentic capabilities that are today driven by implementers, right? By consultants and implementation partners more than, vendors, or you did the hosting platform, you guys are not necessarily getting into that space.
Yeah. No, it's really fascinating insights here. And what I love trying to do is decipher the hype from the reality. And it sounds like you're taking a very practical approach and approaching this in a way that hopefully makes sense for the client, right? At the end of the day, that's what we're trying to achieve. Felipe, as always, the time flies on these so quickly. I hope that I can have you back on and we can talk in more detail about the future of CMSs and what you're seeing is happening. In the meantime, though, if people want to reach out to you or they want to hire you, what are the best ways for them to get in touch with you?
Yeah, thank you, Roger. It's always fun to share ideas with like-minded people. Yeah, so people can find us on Aplyca, aplyca.com, or they can find me on LinkedIn as Felipe Jaramillo. You probably can put it on your comments.
Yes.
But Aplyca is probably the easiest way you can search for my name. Thank you so
Excellent.
much, Roger.
Absolutely, Felipe. I appreciate the time, and I look forward to speaking with you again soon.
All right. Thank you for having me.